Good morning and welcome to Beyond the Big Six, the pivotal roles of lesser-known IC agencies. Now, please welcome INSA President Suzanne Wilson-Heckenberg.
Good morning and happy Tuesday. Welcome to our program today. We are excited to host a panel with some of our community's top leaders. Before we begin though, as usual, a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions, and we hope you do, please submit them to the question box on the right side of your screen. We have over 700 registrants for today's popular program, so our moderator will do her best to get to as many as she can. We're also pleased to welcome members of the press to the call. Please note that this program is on the record and being recorded and will be available on our website later this week. Lastly, a big thank you to our sponsors, Gordon Ventures and Sim Software, for their support of this series. We cannot bring you this high level of thought leadership without them. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. The Honorable Sue Gordon is one of the most accomplished leaders in the history of intelligence and national security. Serving as the Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence from 2017 to 2019, Sue prioritized integrating intelligence, expanding outreach, fostering innovation, and advancing diversity and inclusion across the community. Previously, she served for 2 years as the Deputy Director of NGA and for 27 years at the CIA, where she held senior executive positions in each of the agency's then 4 directorates. And the private sector, Sue continues contributing to the mission through various board and advisory roles, including her role here at INSA as our Senior Intelligence Advisor. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Sue Gordon. Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for the too kind introduction. And one that reminds me how much I love the job and why I'm so glad to be here today. You all are in for a treat. These may be lesser known agencies externally, but inside the intelligence community, it's hard to find organizations that are more impactful, particularly in a digital connected world where some of the national security challenges change when geographic boundaries are not as dominant as some digital boundaries before. So I'm just delighted to be able to highlight the work of these organizations that during my tenure made me proud, and especially in the 5 years since have just continued to give the United States such tremendous advantage. I'm honored to be here today with the Honorable Lisa Kenna, the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Intelligence and Research at State Department, Jay Tilden, the Director of Intelligence and Counterintelligence at the Department of Energy, and the Honorable Kenneth Wainstein, Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome you all. We'll do a little bit of a first round where you get free form, where I'll ask you, and I'll start with you, Secretary Kenna. Just talk about your organization, its role both within your department, but in the intelligence community, and how your interactions go, and then we'll get to some other aspects of your work. Great to see you this morning.
Very good. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. So the Bureau of Intelligence and Resource is an all-source intelligence element, and we're actually the only intelligence unit within the U.S. government that is dedicated to providing intel support to diplomacy to diplomats. So there are a couple of attributes that that set us apart from other intelligence elements, and number one is our expertise. Our colleagues in this unit have tremendous depth and breadth of experience. On average, our colleagues, our analysts, have about 14 account. That's unusual. And we have a very low attrition rate within INR. Secondly, our access to policymakers and to diplomats is really unparalleled. We sit with the diplomats and policymakers, and that lets us understand their needs as diplomats more acutely, and that helps us to develop the type of analysis that they can use most effectively within their diplomacy. And then finally, we're agile. I'd say we're quite small. Agile. the small intelligence elements, but that means that we're flat and we're fast, okay? So we don't have a lot of layers of bureaucracy that slow us down, and that lets our analysts act very quickly and independently, and that's to the benefit of the diplomats who are using our intelligence. So within the intelligence community, as I mentioned, we're one of the 3 all-source agencies. So we're interacting continually with the rest of the IC to coordinate on intel products and to provide our views. And we also seek information from other agencies who have more expertise than we do on a particular issue. So for instance, if a policy client has a question about battlefield dynamics in Ukraine, it may be that we have the best analyst on that particular issue, but if not, we're going to go to the agency that does have the best analyst so that we can offer our diplomats the most complete picture. So the bottom line is that we're uniquely positioned to support diplomacy and our diplomats here. I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. I'll come back in a second, but I want to kind of get the overview from each of you. Jay, how about the same thing for Department of Energy and your role in intelligence and counterintelligence?
Great. First off, I want to thank INSA and thank you, Sue, for hosting this. Lisa and Ken, great seeing you. So first off, the department I just want to explain a little bit about the department, then our office. I mean, DOE is the 3rd largest R&D provider for the federal government. And at $24.2 billion in FY24, we have nerds. We have lots of nerds. And they study nuke, they study science, they study material properties, cyber, it's all over. And our number one goal is to leverage that technical expertise out at the labs and bring it to whether or not it's for the secretary and the deputy and the internal policy needs, or for the larger IC to really tackle those hard problems. And that's really what we do. We're largely known for being the foreign nuclear weapons program kind of experts and nuclear bombs, but we do a lot more than that. We have great relations with CIA, DIA on CP and nuclear things. We have fantastic relations with DHS on critical infrastructure, cyber problems. I think we do a lot of joint products, and we do a lot of joint products with Treasury as well. And that really shows you kind of when you're, as Lisa mentioned, when you're a small agency and kind of flat, you have to be agile and you have to partner. Otherwise, you might get left behind by the big, massive ones. So that's a quick summary.
Awesome. Thanks, Jay. All right. Secretary Wainstein, bring us home. Give us an overview of your office at DHS.
Okay, happy to do so. Thanks, Sue and Lisa and Jay. Great to see you, and thanks to INSA for sponsoring this. Really happy to be part of it, and proud to be one of the small intelligence agencies. We're small but mighty. So let me just take a minute to give a little description, sort of a history-based description of our operation. So we are the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, 850 odd federal employees, another 300 or so contractors. And we're within, obviously, the Department of Homeland Security. And our purpose is really found in our origin story, which is 9/11. So obviously, DHS is founded after 9/11 in a reaction to 9/11, and the Office of Intelligence Analysis, through a couple different iterations, is established to address a particular gap that was identified on 9/11, which is the lack of connectivity between federal law enforcement and the federal intelligence community on one hand, and all the state, local, territorial, tribal, and private sector partners on the other hand. And if you think about 9/11, there were many state and local, in particular state and local partners who knew things that could have been helpful in identifying, revealing the 9/11 plot, didn't get connected. You always hear the term connect the dots, but that information didn't get woven into the information that the federal intelligence community and law enforcement, i.e. the FBI, were developing, and then we had the attacks on 9/11. So the purpose of our organization is really sort of threefold. It's first to develop that intelligence network that incorporates all those partners: federal intelligence, federal law enforcement, SLTTP, state, local, territorial, tribal, and private sector partners, and make sure that there is sort of sharing of information and intelligence amongst all of them. And so that means from the federal side out to SLTTP, but also from the SLTTP partners back to the federal system. So developing that network is a primary job of ours. Related to that is we are by statute primarily responsible for the sharing of information with our SLTTP partners to make sure that intelligence is getting out to them. So developing the network and sharing the information. And then third, to do each of those two things in very strict compliance with the principles of privacy and civil liberties. Because obviously, whenever you're talking about doing intelligence work inside the United States, domestically, incredibly sensitive. And so Congress set us up with very strict limitations in terms of what we can and cannot do to make sure that when intelligence work is being done within the United States, rights are carefully protected. So that's sort of a three-part mission, and we do that, as I said, with a large workforce or good-sized workforce here in the National Capital Region, 700 odd, and then about another 150 or more out around the country in fusion centers working hand in glove with all our partners. And we obviously, in the course of doing that, work very closely with our partners in the rest of the intelligence community, whether it's co-writing pieces for the President's Daily Brief or coordinating with Lisa in meetings at the White House. We work together very closely. And so it's an honor to be part of this, as I said, small but mighty group of small intelligence agencies. So back to you, Sue. That's an overview.
No, it's terrific. So I'll take a moment of personal privilege, but maybe it'll be interesting for our audience. When last I left my heroes, the issues of the day were Lisa kind of shifting to a great power competition, and some of the work that INR did was, I think, some of the earliest, most integrated work on that picture. Jay, we were still, as always, kind of wrestling with the transition on counterterrorism and the focus on the particulars of a nuclear threat combined with that. And Ken, it was certainly election security, but it was even more so this notion of integrating federal and state and local. What are your top issues today? Ken, because I made Lisa go first last time, you get to take that one. Just kind of top of mind in terms of the things they're kind of the big national security issues. What are the ones that are really dominating your focus?
Well, I mean, it's obviously one of the animating missions for DHS was terrorism. Terrorism remains a major focus of ours in all its forms, and as you know, terrorism has evolved since the days of 9/11, when the primary focus was, and primary threat was from foreign terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. Now the most deadly and persistent threat is actually domestic violent extremism here in the United States, but we also have serious concerns about foreign terrorist organizations, and those have been only heightened in the aftermath of what happened in Gaza and the ongoing conflict over there. So terrorism obviously is still a very first top priority concern. Another is what you just mentioned, election security. CISA, which is one of our fellow parts of the DHS, is very focused on helping our state and local partners ensure the integrity of the election system, integrity against all threats, whether it's cyber threats, whether it's threats of violence against election workers and the like, whether it's disinformation trying to mislead people about how elections are taking place, time, place, and manner of elections, this kind of thing. So we are helping them in terms of generating intelligence about those issues, because we know that there are many threat actors out there who are seeing opportunity in the coming election. And then I guess one other issue that I would flag that is really front of mind here is the threat that we're seeing in America from synthetic opioids and fentanyl. Americans are dying at a horrendous clip whatever, 100,000 overdoses last year, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so many of these are deaths from people who had no idea that they're jeopardizing themselves by taking a pill that has fentanyl in it. And the fentanyl trade is not abating. There's no indication it's going to abate, and it's going to continue to require intense enforcement focus, which it is receiving from all relevant agencies, including DHS, with HSI very intently focused on it. But we are working closely with our state and local partners to get as much information about that trade, in particular about the cartels operating in Mexico and working across the southwest border, shipping the synthetic opioids over into the United States. We're very focused and working closely with our partners, sheriff's offices and the like, to generate intelligence to equip everybody with the ability to anticipate where that trafficking is happening and to try to interdict that trafficking. It's a huge issue. It's a huge concern. And as I said, it's one of the most deadly threats that we're facing in our society right now.
Yeah, remarkable. Lisa, how about you?
Sure, yes. I will answer the question, but I'm just going back to the fact that here in INR, in the Department of State, we really are positioned to serve the diplomats. So, and the Department of State has a global remit, so we're honestly trying to be responsive to everything that we judge the Secretary of State and the senior policymakers, and of course also the President and the White House need in order to make good decisions. So that means, you know, that we are often writing about issues, topics that no one else is covering, right? Because we, as a small agency, we're not going to. We never try to, you know, compete with other agencies. We're here to fill critical gaps and address issues that perhaps aren't being addressed through other intelligence analysis. Of course, however, you know, we're also, you know, keenly interested in terrorism, in indicators and warnings of how that is likely to evolve. Migration trends, strategic competition, and global views of strategic competition. Of course, we are also increasingly looking at things like adversary alignment and responses to that. Those are just a few of the things that we're focused on. But again, the remit is global.
Yeah, no, I think that was the perfect answer, Lisa, and I think it's one of the things that people miss so much is it isn't a picking and choosing. It's broad responsibility, and then understanding the role of intelligence, which is beyond just 5-year-old soccer. It's really covering it all. So actually, your answer was perfect. Now beat that, Jay.
Oh yeah, no way.
Since I just gave the perfect answer, and listen, Lisa, your answer, and actually combined with Ken, is kind of who we are, right? But Jay, you want to add anything from Energy's perspective?
Sure. So you know, Sue, you mentioned where we were and where we are. Some of the things are very similar. You know, clearly we are. I mean, given the situation in the world, and given the situation of nuclear weapons programs in the world, that still remains really a pretty high top priority. And clearly, as mentioned, you know, we, Lisa, don't have your broad scope. We have broad scientific scope, but we know a lot of the products help to inform really critical things at state regarding how are we going forward with these international relations, future of arms control, weapons in space, nuclear weapons in space. All of those things right now are just roiling. Layer onto that, you know, climate change and this transition to green energy, which is, again, a huge chunk of what the department is working on. And how does that feather into nuclear power, which is really important? It's a critical component of kind of all the things that we need to meet the future energy demands of not just the nation, but the world. And of course, intrinsic to that is always nuclear proliferation threats. So those things remain very high on the list. Another topic, which I think, Sue, you may get in another question, is of course emerging technologies. So the speed of which technology accelerates and advances is something that is really hard for the IC to stay apprised and to stay connected to, because it's being led by industry, it's being led by the markets, it's not being led by the US government, right? If you think about World War II, that was kind of switched. The government had the heft to lead certain developments, and through the Cold War, right? Now what we see are these large, massive companies that are actually leading, and it's absolutely up to us to figure out creative ways to stay connected with those non-state entities, I think, to use the term that the DNI has been espousing, to how do we engage those companies to stay apprised of things that have huge impacts to not just intelligence analysis and not just the national security, but literally to the trends of the world writ large. So that's kind of where we are, and we love to share and to work with our state colleagues on areas that we have kind of, I won't say primacy on, but we have a pretty good bench. And that way they don't have to do everything, right? There are some things we can help them do. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that point. I think, this is a world where national security decision makers are not limited to people in governmental roles, right? And so they are, whether it's in their technical choices or with whom they form relationships, are making decisions for us. And so using our wisdom to help them understand the geopolitical landscape is, I think, is a really interesting role. And I'm glad you mentioned it. But Jay, let me stay on the technology front, but flip from our assessment of technology and how we can share that into our use of technology, because we are not immune to the fact that this is an increasingly digital technical world. And can you talk a little bit about the role of technology and maybe AI, but not just that, in the performance of your work and how you've brought that into the agency?
Well, that's a great question, and I usually cringe when I hear the word AI because I
know, me too, but I just had to say it because I get paid by,
I just got to say, Skynet, it's coming. Anyway, so no, seriously, AI. First off, the department has been leading on computational, right, efforts since we stopped testing. Right, that became a fundamental driver when we stopped testing nuclear weapons. The department needed to have methods to ensure that our stockpile, our nuclear stockpile, is safe, secure, and reliable. And we have been at the cutting edge until just recently. We have been always at the cutting edge of computational advancements. Now we're just keeping right a pace of big industry. And if you check the fastest, biggest computers, we're always somewhere on the list. You'll see China kind of nugging in there. They're getting in there too, right? I mean, this is important. And that brings you to AI, because ultimately, to some degree, we've already got some aspects of AI already out there. But understanding where it's going to take us is really the hard problem. So on one hand, how do we utilize it? And thinking about Ken's world, how do you utilize AI and meet all the legal requirements, right? To make sure you're not violating 12333, privacy, civil liberties, all of those things. How do you make sure AI is actually a way that is utilizing the correct data sets so that your analysis is being improved? You can actually maybe get out of a lot of redundant activities that we do now that can actually really be automated at a higher level with the use of AI. But then there's the other side of AI, which I alluded to when I said Skynet, which is, what will our adversaries learn from this? What are the ways that can be used in more malign aspects? And that's, I think, many of the current administration's policies are trying to do both of those, trying to embrace it, not make it a boogeyman, but understand that there are very real downsides to this, and also understand very carefully in the nature of strategic competition, how do we kind of stay, if not number one, right at close to 1.5, right? How do we stay ahead? So that to me is really one of the largest things facing us.
I've tracked, I'll call it modernization, but it's so much more than that. What you've been doing in terms of the use of technology in order to be able to command the information that you need and able to support diplomatic efforts. You want to jump into this?
Yes, absolutely. So the in INR, in the State Department, we're always going to have unique accesses to NGOs, academics, industry, the private sector. And so that brings us a ton of data, and data quantity is exploding. But we have the same small number of colleagues working on these issues. So we need the technology to help us make sense of all the data. And so this is one of the reasons why we created an open source coordination unit that is really set up to help our analytical teams think about how to engage with other IC partners in industry to make most efficient use of the data. So eventually, we're hoping that that IC and intelligence community cleared AI tools will help us speed up the different stages of analysis, organizing, summarizing data. And we have a number of analysts that are already doing that right now, and we're using it in our polling unit as well. But we see a lot of potential in that space. Thanks.
You bet. Ken, how are you? Anything special?
No, just to reiterate, AI is both an opportunity, but also potential area of peril, and doesn't take much imagination to see how our adversaries can and are using it to our detriment. I mean, I mentioned earlier the idea of adversaries trying to mislead the American public about time, place, and manner of the election. Easy to use AI to scale those efforts and get a disinformation out at a much broader scale than without AI. That's just one example of how it can be used against us, but also can be used by us to foil their efforts. And when earlier this year, or I guess last year, I should say, the Secretary Mayorkas stood up our AI task force here in the department to look at how AI can be used effectively, whether it's looking for trends of malign or patterns of malign conduct in shipping routes and this kind of thing to try to interdict fentanyl. That just sort of positing a hypothetical. You could think of myriad ways it can and should be used, but to Jay's point, it's it has to be, especially in the intelligence space, you have to be very careful about using it in a way that protects privacy. So we're busily working on our policies about how it can and should not be used by us for intelligence purposes.
Yeah, it's one, I love the focus on privacy. I think that's one of the things that's too often misunderstood, is just how committed we are to that part of national security, which is privacy. So glad to hear you say that. The other thing is just intelligence by itself is a distinct craft that involves incomplete information, some judgments drawn, and the combination of technology making judgments, and that is just something that has to be factored into the use of it. The obverse of technology, and you've all mentioned it in terms of the partnerships you have, any special considerations in cybersecurity that you all, I know the effort that the intelligence community puts in general, but do you have any particular areas of focus with cybersecurity just because of all the outreach you're doing to disparate organizations that are not all under your control? How much of a thought is this for you all, or a concern? And anyone can jump in on that. All right, go ahead, Jay.
Well, so this is great because this is an area where I think Ken's folks and our folks really work closely on, which is, securing, as you know, the Department of Energy is the kind of the SRMA. It's the Sector Risk Management Agency. So we're the proponent to attempt to secure and make sure that our energy infrastructure is secured and reliable and can deliver. As you all know, though, this thing was built 70 years ago. It was not even designed to resist against cyber threats. So actually just acknowledging that it's going to be really hard to prevent all manner of things from happening, and you can focus on what are the things that really can happen. So cyber has been a huge area. I have an intelligence analysis function for cyber for the grid. And I also have kind of an experimental program for that as well. And we partner with CSER. So like CISA on Ken's side for critical infrastructure, CSER is the Cyber and Electrical Security and Emergency Response Office within the department that partners with industry. So yet again, a common theme here. Industry is the one that owns that sector. They're the ones that we need to enable to understand the threats. And then they can also come back and say, well, here's my worry about my vulnerabilities, and then plot a path forward on what do we do. So the cyber piece is here and now. I'm utilizing the potential Taiwan Straits, China 2027, which I don't believe. I don't think China is ready for a Normandy-style invasion of Taiwan. And I think by doing so, it actually ruins the whole point of what they want from Taiwan, which is that economy intact. That's my 2 cents worth. Nonetheless, I'm going to utilize that date to make sure that along with our industry partners, we've done everything that we can to make sure that lights don't get turned off at Oahu or on Guam or Australia, right, or the West Coast. Those are really important things that they're just very easy to assess, right? This is all open source stuff. There's no secret here. So anyway, to me, that's where my cyber head is on this. Other than that, it's Control-Alt-Delete and change your password. All right, thanks.
Yeah, cyber hygiene, it'll do 90% of the work. I totally agree. Lisa or Ken, you want to jump in before I change to topics?
I'm happy to. Yes. Okay. So cybersecurity is a huge concern for us here at the department, but particularly within INR, because our office manages the top secret network for the entire Department of State. So that brings us additional responsibilities and obligation to be quite vigilant. I have no doubt that we're cooperating with a number of people in the audience here today on that front. But I'll say that we neglected to invest in the network the way we needed to over a period of time. So we're right now digging out of a tech debt that has required a major investment, and we're on track to ensure that everything is knitted up and safe. And I'll say that as recently as this past year, we, as a result of an internal security review, we caught an insider threat. So things are looking more positively on that front.
Yeah, but again, you do have quite the issue of distributed networks. Listen, y'all, you've asked a bunch to the audience. You've asked a few questions already. I promise I'll get to about I'll only dominate time with these amazing panelists for a few more minutes. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to put them in, and I'll try and get to as many as I can with you. Hey, I've recently been saying that the nation's most significant supply chain challenge is that of talent. And we all know that the secret sauce in mission performance is attracting and retaining talent. Ken, let me start with you. How's it going for you, attracting the talent you need in order to be able to perform all the missions that you've shared with us?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And so often when we have these conversations, we talk about the threat, we talk about the programs, we talk about the various missions, but we overlook the most basic critical fact that it's the people who carry those missions out, and we have to have strong people. Actually, from this perspective, we're doing quite well in terms of attracting strong talent. We've got very talented people here generally, and I tell you, I learn from my colleagues each and every day. But we've got a couple advantages. One, we have a very strong internship program. So if there's any bright college student out there who wants to work a summer doing intelligence work, come here. And then the idea is you can then roll into a permanent job after you finish college. That's been operating for a dozen years or so, and that's a tremendous source of good talent. We get great, smart young folks who get some training during the summer so they can really hit the ground running when they come after college. We have that. We also are dealing with where we've got a number of efforts on the diversity front. And that's an issue actually that diversity is a particular challenge in the intelligence field for a variety of historical reasons. I think the intelligence field is just less diverse than others, and so we've had a fairly well-established diversity program here that is, I think, it's paying benefits. That we've got a very good, diverse, and talented professional group of analysts and others who work here. So, look, it's a constant challenge to to keep good people because private sector and others lure them away. But we're actually holding our own and doing pretty well.
Yeah, I love the advertisement. I think if people knew how much responsibility you have early and the bigness of the challenges you need to address, we'd get everyone. So in listening to you, Ken, I'm thinking best first 5 years anyone can spend. Yep. Is with one of these agencies. And then there may be other things. You may not be looking at a 40-year career, but it will certainly be the best first 5. Lisa or Jay, you want to add anything in, or was Ken perfect?
We use the same tools, I'd say, that Ken uses, the internship programs, the fellowships. I mean, that helps us bring in new and diverse talent, and I believe helps our long-serving analysts stay fresh in their fields as well. We happen to have a very high retention rate here, so we're not doing a lot of hiring. I mean, but what we're doing is trying to recruit sort of the one-off, regional or industry experts that really have a lot of experience in their fields, in addition to drawing from the intern and fellow pool, to make sure we get new and fresh ideas. Thanks.
So of course I have to jump in, right? So one, if you want to work with nerds, come on over. All right. So first off, I want to echo kind of what both Lisa and Ken mentioned. For the federal workforce, getting that diversity is harder, right? One is you're a little bit constrained by the fixed approach of the GS rating and where we are. And many times it's concentrated in DC, and it's really hard to bring in those juniors in DC. It's hard to live, it's expensive. We have a huge benefit in that we have those 17 multi-purpose national labs around the country, some of which do all unclassified work, all the way up to some are totally dedicated to national security. And those employers, those companies can really bring in a broad array of talent. So the diversity of the 5,000 plus intelligence professionals that we have sprinkled about in these labs in our field intelligence elements. And by the way, we're always looking for great counterintelligence professionals because we have to protect all the great R&D secrets that are being developed out there. That really gives you a multitude of options for where you could be brought into this rather large. It's not just a DC-based intelligence function. So we really do benefit from that relative to diversity and relative to the demographics, right? I mean, as you all know, we went through for a while where you started walking around the halls and all your analysts on Russia and China were, pushing 60, and you're worried like, okay, well, who's the next generation? And they haven't gotten out of college yet, right? I think that's been fixed, but that's where we were literally 15 years ago. So yeah, I think, like I said, you want to come work with nerds, come on over.
Nerds are good. I love that. Let's flip and talk with not just our internal talent, but engagement with the private sector, because this isn't at all new for the intelligence community, but I will say it is unbelievably even more important to each of your missions, I suspect. So Ken, talk about, and I'll go to each of you because I think it'll be slightly different. How do you engage with the private sector? And what are some areas that you think for even increased engagement and impact? Ken, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so just to state the obvious, one of the primary missions of the department and therefore of IA is protection of critical infrastructure. And critical infrastructure is largely in private hands. So at a very fundamental level, we have to partner with the private sector, and we do. We do across the department. CISA obviously is very linked, with the private sector. Other parts of the department, we have a very strong private sector liaison effort, and involve ourselves in a variety of ways with private sector partners. So just one example, or a couple of examples. One is we have what are called the Corporate Security Symposium, about 10 of these a year, where we get the corporate security officers of a variety of companies, and we meet in New York, or I think I'm speaking in Huntsville next month. And they all come together, and the FBI is there and other agencies participate, but we put them on with the FBI. And these are tremendous fora for sharing of best practices. We give a bit of an intelligence briefing, but really it's more a matter of getting all these players together who are all seeing these issues from their own unique perspectives and sharing ideas and best practices. They're tremendous innovation. They've been going on now for, I think we're about to finish our 10th year. And I don't know, we put on 100 of them or so. So that's an example of engagement with the private sector that I think is really paying benefits. But it's just to once again state the obvious, we need to continue to build on that coordination, because that the private sector is going to be more and more central in for national security purposes. As Jay said, this isn't the old days where the federal government builds it for the private sector. It's now the other way around.
Jay?
I think, you know, when it comes to the direct stuff that DOE-IN does, Ken already nailed that piece. That was that chunk, this SRMA responsibilities. What I will say, though, is that we have a much broader surface when you get out of DOE-IN to the national labs. Again, this is a $40 billion enterprise, of which 24 million is R&D. A lot of that money goes to the labs and goes to private sector and partnerships. And that's a great way to leverage connections into the certain area that you're interested in. It just depends on the topic and what you're after. So we try to utilize that in very, well, first off, very overt ways. We don't have any covert authorities, right? It's very open and honest about it. But you also have to be careful, because sometimes they get a little squirrely when you say, yeah, I'm with the Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, and I want to, well, you want to arrest me? It's like, no, you just want to talk, you know? But there's a way to do it. And so that surface, you know, again, to some degree, the heft of the federal budget that the department has really gives us access in other areas that we would not have. Thanks.
Lisa, anything special?
You know, in addition to some points that have already been made, our perspective at the State Department is always to ask, you know, what does the private sector have, you know, in terms of special insights or tools that can help us understand the issues that we're looking at more efficiently or more thoroughly. And, you know, whether it is, you know, in terms of access to data, as I mentioned before, or helping us learn how to use that data more effectively to fill information gaps, that's always going to be useful to our diplomats, because to use intelligence most easily, it helps when it's available commercially, so that we don't have to worry about sources and methods and declassifying information. So it's always going to be to our benefit to cooperate with you know, the private sector to build our ability to access commercially available data.
Yeah, Lisa, great point. And actually, listening to each one of you, I'm struck by that the relationship with the private sector isn't focused. I mean, this is certainly a part of it, on the exchange of things, right? Not the acquisition of things that the private sector has, but really the sharing of information that each need, right? And it is that kind of bilateral of, we're all in this together. What is it that the government has that the private sector needs and can use? And what you've each articulated really well is how do we make the needs of the government more obvious, so that the knowledge, understanding, and reach and access of the private sector can really come into play. And Lisa, what you mentioned is that's really important for our partners, right, as well. So I'm going to ask a couple of our audience questions, and then I'll come back, and I promise I'll give each one of you a chance to talk specifically about your agencies in ways that I might have missed. So don't think that I'm not coming back to each one of you specifically. To push on the last one that we were talking about with private sector engagement, Lee Watson asks, is there anything specifically that we need to be doing between the kind of cleared, trusted private sector leaders and the intelligence organizations? You've talked about it in general, and particularly the open source area, but Lee asks if there's anything really exciting going on in terms of engaging the cleared populations on both. And for these questions, I'm going to turn it over to you, to anyone who's got an answer that you want to share with our audience. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start, and it's one that actually does kind of include some of Ken's folks. So we have a pilot project sponsored by CSER, remember the Cyber and Electricity Security and Emergency Response Office, called ETAC. It's the Energy Threat Analysis Center, and that is where some of the main energy sector companies have offered up, if you will, as part of the deal, part of this compact, to have some cleared folks to be able to have access to the high side kind of threats. So DOEIN brings the nature of the cyber threats and the multidisciplinary sometimes threats to the energy sector with CSER and with our industry partners. And then they talk through the issues and talk through the potential overlays of vulnerabilities. And then in the end, and Volt Typhoon was I think many people are familiar with that. This was a kind of a Chinese cyber thing. It was released that, you know, how to go look for that, how to see if you think you have that problem on your system. And then you actually end up publishing for the industry sector a guide that goes out to all of the, you know, public utility districts, and it's written like by industry members. So that way it's not government speak that's flying over the head of the industry owners. It's actually in their language and in their lingo to explain what to go look for. So to me, that's one of the easy top lines that I could give about how to really deepen the partnership that actually migrates from the TSSCI to the collateral to then an OUO or a CUI level kind of a product that then can go out to industry.
Let me bundle a couple questions on the technology issue, one from Blake Bartlett and one from John Grimes. And they say, one is on tech certainly drives productivity benefits. Do you see any areas where it can, I think what he said was not replace, but at least reduce the requirement for the human analysts? And then the other that John asked was, are there areas of human work, human analysis that are the most immune to technology augmentation? So one is, do we see technologies that will really help or shift where the human work is done? And there are other areas that are always going to be done by humans, if I get that right, John and Blake. Who wants to leap in on that hand grenade? I see you, Ken.
I'll jump on the grenade, partially. So look, it's a fair question. Look, as we discussed earlier, there are areas where we do review of documentation by hand that could be done. It can be done by AI in a much more efficient way, and that's an area that, you know, we're seeking resources to do that. And this, of course, plays out in a variety of different areas in the intelligence field where you have a lot of data that, you know, more efficiently screened with AI. That's obviously an area that where AI can step in and help a lot. Look, in terms of the role of the analyst, I don't ever see a day where we're just going to be able to have machines spit out an analytical product that meets the needs of our customers. We're actually, you know, generative AI is an issue, and we actually have a policy on not using generative AI for purposes of our written products. But that, you know, as we've seen all too often, generative AI ends up with flawed products that get people in trouble. I was reading a story the other day about a lawyer who used generative ChatGPT to do a pleading, and it came up with some phantom sites of cases that didn't even exist. So for a variety of reasons, I just don't see the day where analysts are no longer needed, that machines can spit out exactly what we want. So I don't know if that helps.
So
I endorse that last position. I don't see a moment, but I do see areas where it can help augment them, but not replace. Jay, I jumped on top of you.
Well, first off, it's almost just a statement of fact that once a major technology shift happens, that you lose certain sector jobs and then you gain other sector jobs, right? That is something that I think often we, as from a national economic policy, don't think through, right? So, but that being said, I will echo what Ken mentioned maybe in a slightly different way. Right now, what we're suffering from is we have too much data, and we don't have the people. And AI might be that thing that can help to sift and sort through these larger tranches of data to the same number of analysts that we have in a more meaningful way. We all know right now that there's data in the file servers, in the data farms, everywhere that just haven't been scraped. It hasn't been, right? Especially images, right? And images that can be maybe a plan for a piece of a weapon or a part or whatever. So, I see that at least in the near term, AI not being a big kind of removal of the human in the loop, but rather more enabling the massive amount of data that's been confronting our analysts in a way that will help to make that much more manageable.
Let's see, other questions we have here. Let's see. So a little bit on the issue of skill sets, a question here from one Heidi, and I can't remember who else asked the question of how are we using joint duty to kind of do the cross-cutting skill building that we need. And someone mentioned that CIA is really looking into hiring special folks with skill sets and key skills that we don't have. Are you all seeing any increased use of those in order to kind of do the cross-cutting integrated analysis that is in demand today? Lisa?
I can
thanks for
respond on
taking
that.
that.
Yes.
And the questions were better than the ones that I reflected, but you can figure it out.
We are 100% availing of fellowships and internships, and also joint duty assignments to recruit people who have the skills, the ESTH types of skills that we need. And it's been incredibly effective in terms of enriching our team and allowing us to respond to questions from policymakers for more analysis in those areas. So, yes.
Y'all, so many great questions. I know Suzanne's going to pop on here in a minute and tell us it's almost time to go. So let me just run around. I'll start with you, Jay. What didn't you get a chance to say about the Department of Energy in your organization?
Well, first of all, I think I got to say plenty, so thank you. But I will say that, again, whether or not you're looking for the department's intelligence functions or whether or not just the department writ large, I think we're the largest from budget standpoint and personnel of the smalls. And we really do have a distributed workforce that is both federal support service contractor and then national laboratory management and operating contracts. There are plenty of opportunities, and we are not just the nuclear bomb folks. We do a very broad range of things, and I find it to be very exciting. I would just end with, we're probably one of the last few national security enterprises that Jill Ruby, our undersecretary who heads up the nuclear weapons complex, says is kind of it's like a captive industry. People can actually come here and move around to the different labs, plants, sites, and locations for a 30-year career and have multiple different jobs and different avenues. And that's kind of, it's a unique thing. So, because most people now, as mentioned, you get your 3 to 5 years and you pop out and you go somewhere else. So anyway, that's my sales pitch. Thank you.
Awesome. Lisa, INR is one of my very favorites, not just because the CIA and INR have been inextricably bound through its history. What did I miss?
Yes, so we do not have the tremendous resources and the number of facilities that Jay mentioned, but we consider ourselves a really a unique tool of the Secretary of State and for the President as well. But we know we couldn't do it alone. So as I mentioned before, we're trying to look for areas where we add special value, and in the process of doing that, we really make an effort to tap into the expertise and the resources and the shared insights that the rest of the intelligence community and the government and the private sector, industry, and these non-state entities all bring to creating the nuanced intelligence picture that informs good policy making.
Great. Ken, it's hard for me to imagine a relatively new organization that has had a more significant impact on the national security issues today than DHS and OIA. Bring us home. What did we miss?
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it, Sue. Look, I'll just sort of end where I began with which is the mission of INA to sort of develop that intelligence network within the United States that had long, existed with our intelligence community overseas. And the wisdom of that is bearing out now even more than 20 years ago, because with the increased globalization and the increased influence of the internet and cyber capabilities, threats that used to be external threats are now external and internal. You can just look at whether it's transnational repression happening at the hands of state actors here in the United States, or pre-positioning by our nation-state adversaries on our critical infrastructure systems in anticipation of conflicts overseas, or the effect of cartels from Mexico here in the homeland with fentanyl. The threat is coming home to roost in the United States, and that dichotomy that divide between the foreign sphere and the domestic sphere is just broken down, reinforcing the need for that integrated approach that brings all our SLTT partners into the fight with the federal partners against those threats, which now don't respect borders at all. So just to say that the founders of DHS and INA, I think the wisdom of the mission that they crafted is even more true today than it was 20 years ago when we were founded.
So Suzanne, it's clear to me that there's no longer a secret here. You could have given us 2 hours. We would have filled it in with an even more riveting conversation that we had. So thanks for giving me a chance to be with my friend, Secretary Kenna, Secretary Wainstein, and Director Tilden.
Absolutely, Sue, and thank you for joining us as well, Lisa, Ken, and Jay this morning. I learned a lot, and particularly it is empowering to hear about how you all collaborate for the greater good. So really appreciate your time this morning. So if our attendees would stick around for just another moment, I just want to tell you all a little bit about some of our upcoming events, and also thank Gordon Ventures and Sim Software for sponsoring this series. And for everyone online for joining us, I wanted to let you all know on August 22nd, ICCIO Adele Merritt will be joining us for a morning coffee and conversation. Also next week, we will be having the AFCEA INSA Intelligence and National Security Summit. We're expecting a record-breaking 2,000 attendees the August 27th to 28th of next week at the Bethesda North Marriott Hotel and Conference Center. Please go online to check out the lineup of our plenary and panel speakers. And then to kick off September, we're looking forward to insights from CIA on cloud and data, a special edition of our coffee and conversation taking place on September 4th with Larry Taxon, Chief of CloudWorks at CIA, and Chris Benight, the agency's technical director in their data office. And then also the first installment of our Future of the IC Workforce Technical and Talent Transformation, where Joe Ellen Adkins, Acting Director of Human Development, NGA, and Lauren Bean Bueda, who's the founder of CEO of Girl Security, will be joining us, along with Lindsay Kaiser at Clearance Jobs. And lastly, we will be holding our SCIF After Hours with Treadwell, NGA Associate Director for Capabilities on September 25th. This is a classified in-person program. This concludes today's program, and don't forget to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. Thanks so much and have a great afternoon.